Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. As we saw last time, in this set of verses, Krishna is describing the set of practices, the set of qualities that we need to develop, to cultivate in order to realize God. So we saw in verses 51 and 52, I'll just read the translation again. Endued with a pure understanding, controlling the mind with tenacity, relinquishing sense objects such as sound and laying aside likes and dislikes, resorting to a sequestered place, eating little, controlled in speech, body and mind, always devoted to the yoga of contemplation, cultivating dispassion. These are among the practices that we need to develop. We studied it last time. The verse number 52, resorting to a sequestered place, etc., that has a rather special significance to me personally, because after I received my final vows of monastic life, I had written a letter. This was the pre-email days. Written a letter to Swami Saradeshananda. His other name was Gopesh Maharaj. He was a disciple of the Holy Mother, Sharda Devi. And he lived in northern India, in Vrindavan. And so after my ordination, I had written a letter to him seeking his blessings. And he wrote a beautiful reply in Bengali. And then he pointed this particular verse to me, the 52nd verse in 18th chapter, and asked me, keep this verse in mind always. And because it was something that he recommended to me, every time I study the Gita, and when I come to this particular verse, I remember. So let's begin with verse 53 now. Ahankaram balam darpam kamam krodham parigraham vimuccha nirmama shanto brahma bhuyaya kalpate. Forsaking egotism, power, arrogance, desire, anger, and superfluous things, free from the notion of mine and tranquil, is fit for becoming Brahman. Look at the last phrase. He's fit for becoming Brahman. Brahma bhuyaya kalpate. Although that's the literal translation, what it means is not that we have become someone else. Right now, at this very moment, we are already Brahman. But we have as if become someone else. And even though it is as if, even though we have not really become someone else, our life can be radically changed. Our reactions can be completely different. To some extent, we see people suffering from severe dementia or Alzheimer's, for instance. So when a person who is suffering from Alzheimer's, is it the same person or it's a different person? It's not very easy to answer that question, really. There is in fact a story being sometimes told about how one elderly person, he was in his mid-80s, his wife was suffering from this very severe case of Alzheimer's and was in a nursing home. And it was such a severe case, she did not recognize anyone, not even her husband. They were married for more than 50 years. So every day, morning around 8 o'clock or 8:30, he would visit her in that nursing home and have a cup of coffee with her. So there was this table and 2 cups of coffee would be kept. They would bring her in, she would sit, and they would have coffee together. And she had no idea with whom she was having coffee, and she couldn't recognize it. And this went on days and months and years. And then, of course, she would go to her room and he would return. Then, after a few years, one of the managers in that nursing home was a bit curious. And so he asked that gentleman, he said, I'm really impressed with the loyalty and sincerity and punctuality with which you come every day and have a cup of coffee with your wife, but she doesn't even know who you are. She doesn't even recognize you. So what's the point? And then he said, well, she doesn't know who I am, but I know who she is. And that's a very, very kind of very moving story. And so that's the question. Someone who has forgotten everything, is that person the same person or a different person? Now, apparently, that person is acting like a different person. Otherwise, in a normal case, she would have recognized her husband. But now, she's like a total stranger. And yet, well, she is still she. She is not a different person. Now, that's an extreme case, but something similar to what happened to us. Right now, at this very moment, we are all this infinite divine being. We are Brahman right now. We are the Atman. We are the shining, pure, divine spirit at this very moment. But some kind of call it Alzheimer's in a spiritual sense. Kind of a spiritual Alzheimer's has occurred to us. And then we have forgotten that who we are. So even when the Upanishads or our teachers come and say, you are the infinite being, we would react in the same way as that woman would have reacted if this person would have having coffee without have told, you are my wife, or you are so-and-so, and she's like, what is this person saying? So that's the kind of a reaction we have when we read like, you are the infinite being. Now of course, that was the Alzheimer's, and at least with our present knowledge, we kind of almost see it as irreversible. But instead of going to that now, such an extreme case, think of someone who has had loss of memory, which is recoverable. But as long as that person is suffering from the loss of memory, this person won't know who or she that person is. And then, let's say through medication or through some miracle, this person regains the memory. Then you can say, well, this person now again became who he or she was. Now, even when the memory was not there, this person was not really different, but was as if different. Again, that's essentially what spiritual enlightenment and what ignorance means. So we are now from a severe loss of memory. In the second chapter of the Gita, Krishna already uses the term there, smriti bhramshaha, smriti vibhramaha. The word that is used in Sanskrit is smriti vibhramaha, loss of memory. In the Upanishad, in the Chandogya Upanishad, there is the word like smriti bhramshaha, the memory goes away. So that's the essential problem. We are always who we are. We cannot be anything other than who we are. That's the reality. But we can, as if, act like someone different. Sometimes you might notice it if you have a friend or an acquaintance whom you have not met, say, for 30 years. And so you have these old impressions of that person when you have seen that person as a very as a teenager, maybe you were childhood friends, and then you meet after 25 or 30 years, and a lot has changed. I mean, a lot has changed in us, and a lot has changed in the other person too. And if you meet that person, maybe you might recognize the person and yet not recognize the person. The person might be very different from the one you knew. Now, all these different examples are just to kind of drive home the point that we are not really becoming Brahman. We had kind of forgotten who we are, and we go back to being who we are. That's the reality. Now, what do we need to do? In addition to what the verses 51 and 52 said, these are the things we need to take care of in order for us to recover our lost memory. Forsaking egotism. Now, this is something that gets stressed again and again. Sometimes it's helpful to make a distinction between ego and egotism or egoism. I really don't know the technicality whether egotism and egoism there's any difference. Perhaps the students of psychology might have something more to say on this. So I'm just very, in general sense, I like to make a distinction between ego and egoism. And the way I try to understand it is, an ego is simply the sense of I, just I. The sense of I by itself is not so much a problem as what comes after that I. So moment I say I am this or I am that, then it's not simply ego. It then becomes egoism. So just the I standing by itself is not so much a problem. The problem is what gets attached later on, and that could be in terms of our physical characteristics. So even say I'm a man or I'm a woman is a form of egoism. I identify myself with someone. So an ego is an identifier in terms of our body, our mind, our interests, our affiliations, our relationships. So the I gets attached to all of these. And so that's why this ego then becomes egoism. And then of course in addition, well, I'm a scholar, I'm great, I'm powerful. All these kind of we just keep on piling on these things on this I. But just simple I, the kind of I, for instance, when you have really had a good restful sleep, a real peaceful sleep, and then you just wake up very gradually, not suddenly, not being pushed to the, oh, got to do this, I'm late, not with that. If you just kind of sleep, and you have a good sleep, and without any alarm waking you up, in a natural way you just wake up, and you just sit in your bed, and maybe you look out of the window, and maybe it's springtime, and you see grass growing and the flowers. Now, that's actually a very beautiful scenario. So when you wake up, you know who you are, you have the sense of I, but the sense of I is not at that moment attached to anything. Not like, oh, I'm late, or I've got to do this, I've got nothing. You're just there. So it's actually great. So ego and egotism. Now ego is great, but we need to go beyond the ego. Now why is ego a problem, even in that subtle sense, even when we are free from egoism? And the problem is simply this I always has the other polarity called not I. So when I don't have the sense of I don't have the sense of not I. Now in general, we can say what we call the world is everything that is not me. That's essentially the very broad definition of the world. So everything we say, well, this is a part of the world, this is a part of the world, because this is the world, because this is not me. But just me, when I say this is me, everything that is not me becomes an object of my experience, object of my perception. When this me is absent, the not me is absent also. For instance, in deep sleep, when we are fast asleep, we don't have the sense of I. The ego is absent there. And therefore, the world is absent also. So the world depends on my ego. The world can exist only as long as the ego exists. And because the world is the source of problem, and I'm using the word problem in a very generic sense, that even though there may not be a crisis every moment of our lives, but it's the world from which all the stress, anxiety, worry, hopes, fears, everything that comes from our contact with the world. And world is not just in the terms of material objects, but even thoughts, emotions, memories. All of this I'm putting into the category of the world, everything that is not me. And so, the only way to get rid of the world is to get rid of the one who is perceiving the world. And the one who is perceiving the world is this sense of I. When the I goes, as in deep sleep, the world vanishes. Now that is the problem with the ego. So first what a spiritual seeker needs to do is to try to minimize the egoism. And so we need to then, all of the Vedantic training is meant to first minimize all the labels we attach to the I. That is why the hymn that we sing very often on Sundays from Shankaracharya's composition, Nirvana Shatkam. I am not the mind, I am not the body, I am not this, I am not this, I am not this. Essentially, because all of these things are labels attached to the mind, to the ego. So by denying everything that seems to be me or mine, I'm actually reducing the burden the ego carries on itself. And so the more I'm able to let go, for instance, we could have an identity attached to, like, I belong to this neighborhood, I belong to this city, I belong to this country. So all of these identities can be made subservient, for instance, to I'm a human being. So the more I stop seeing distinctions based on nationality, culture, race, religion, to that extent, I'm loosening the hold of those identities on me. So the more I stop discriminating, say between racial, we speak about racial discrimination. Now, a racial discrimination is possible only in those minds who have a strong racial identity. So if I have a very strong, if I'm identified with my race very strongly, then I cannot but look at people and then immediately label the race that they come from. And then all my inbuilt biases, prejudices, likes, dislikes, all those would come into play. So if I now go to a game at Fenway, and if I'm strongly identified with I'm a Sox fan, then just the way my mind invariably then would look and say, oh, that's a Yankees fan. That's because I will then, my identity, my egoism would color the way I label other people. And so the more I'm able to go beyond these limiting identities, the more of the labeling of others will go away. And that's why the Gita often speaks about same-sightedness. Now, how is same-sightedness possible? I mean, there are differences, diversity is very clear. Now, the same-sightedness becomes possible only when I'm able to look beyond these apparent differences. Then it becomes possible to see everyone. And so when we speak about everyone being a child of God, that's a great sentiment, that everyone is a child of God. God is our father, God is our mother, and we are all children of God. Everyone, well, most people like that idea. But why is it that we don't remember it? We don't remember it because my ego, if I kind of cultivate an ego saying I'm a child of God, and if that ego becomes strong, it will become much easier for me to see everyone as children of God. So which way my ego manifests, that is the way I see the world. Now, for most of us, our ego, that I'm a human being, it seems to be pretty effortless. That's just the way we are conditioned. Well, you are a human being. Now, because that identity as a human being is so natural, spontaneous, almost effortless, not almost, well, it is effortless, we have no difficulty seeing everyone as human beings. So we are able to attach the label as human beings to others effortlessly, because I'm able to see myself as a human being effortlessly. If I can see myself truly as the Atman effortlessly, I'll be able to see everyone as Atman. Even when they themselves may not be able to see themselves as Atman, I will still see them as Atman. It's not like if you see everyone as children of God, doesn't automatically mean that others will also start seeing themselves as children of God. They will see themselves according to the way their egoism flourishes. But the way you see the world will depend on how you see yourself. And that's the importance of why egotism needs to be forsaken. Because the world we experience does not have, according to Vedanta, an independent absolute existence. This is very important, because this is very, very important to remember. We generally seem to think that the world kind of goes its own way, and I'm going my own way, and we are kind of interacting. These two realities of the world and mind, we are interacting with one another. But that's not the Gita view. The Gita view is the world and you are in dynamic contact. If you change, the world changes for you. What it happens to others is not the issue here. The world changes for you. And that's why sometimes when we are in a good mood, the world appears a very wonderful place. And if you are in a very sour mood, if you are angry or frustrated or irritated, then the world appears in a very bad way. So we color the world in which we live. In that sense, we create our the world. Now this is really going out of the point a little bit, but think about it this way. Oftentimes, we read in the books the three basic functions of the world, of God. The God who creates the world, maintains it, and then destroys it, or it gets absorbed back into the divine. In some sense, again, we will not go into deep, but this is a thought for you to reflect on. In some sense, we create the world in which we live. The world I see may have some common characteristics with the world that you see, but maybe it's a different world. And that's why it's possible for two people to be in conversation, and one person can say, oh, how wonderful this world is, and someone can say, how terrible this world is. So if they were living in the same world, why would the world appear so different? And if Ramakrishna were here, he would say, I'm just seeing the play of the Divine Mother. And the rest of would say, well, I'm just playing a play of terrorism and evil and people. So then, did Ramakrishna live in the same world that you and I live? And so a case can be made, although we won't argue that case here. A case can be made that we all create our own world. It's possible, again, that every morning we wake up, we are already creating the world in which we are. Throughout the day, as long as we are awake, we are preserving it. And night, when we go to sleep, this world which we created, we absorbed it within us. And then we create a different world and we call it a dream. And we preserve that world, we maintain that world as long as we are sleeping. And when we wake up, we absorb that world within us. And then we create another world. So our going through the stages of waking, dream, and sleep can be seen as a continual creation of worlds. And by world, I'm just using it more in a philosophical sense. That is perception of duality, perception of anything outside of myself. And then that duality kind of gets reabsorbed. It doesn't vanish, because if it vanished, it wouldn't have come again. But we know, we go round and round and round. And therefore, in some Vedanta texts, going to sleep, the word for they call it in Sanskrit, Srishti, Sthiti, and Pralaya. Creation, preservation, and Pralaya means dissolution. So sleep is sometimes called in Vedanta texts as Nitya Pralaya, a daily dissolution. And a waking up would be a daily creation. So it's possible to look upon in a very dualistic way that God created world at some point, or in a non-dualistic way, I'm creating the world every day, every 12 hours if you like. One world which seems to be the waking world, then I create another world which seems to be which I then label it as dream. Now, this labeling is done by me. Essentially, it's just a world. I create the heaven. Why not? So, an event which apparently is called death, just like I create the waking world, I create the dream world, I create a heaven. And that heaven, I maintain it as long as I'm there. When my stay in heaven comes to an end, that heaven gets absorbed, and I create another world, and I call it rebirth. And if that world, the new world that I create is a kind of a nightmare, I call it hell. Now, these are just different labels. Essentially, we go through this thing of perception of duality, seemingly ending, and a perception of a different kind of reality, duality. Swami Vivekananda once said, therefore, that it's possible to, although we normally say we go through waking, dream, and deep sleep, one way of Vedanta students can look at it, that we are going from one dream to another dream. There is an Upanishad called the Aitareya Upanishad. But before I go there, here is one interesting point to remember. We will find the Upanishads are the records of the experiences of the sages. Upanishads are not books written down by someone. When you have books, normally if the author is good, normally you will find a gradual development of an idea. So you have an introduction, then thing, and then kind of a conclusion. It's very systematic. The Upanishads are not as systematic. And sometimes the imagery provided is, it's almost like in the olden days, we call it the forest retreats, all these dense forests, which is where all this philosophy was first intuited. It's almost like all these enlightened beings were seated there, sharing their experiences. And many of the Upanishads seem like just the notes or jottings taken down when these revelations came to these great ones. And that's why for many of us who try to read these Upanishads now, some of them, they have got a brilliance of insights, and then apparently things that we find like, well, how is this connected? How does it go there? How? You will not find not always, sometimes there is, but not always kind of a very linear development of an idea, which is why then commentaries become very, very helpful. Interestingly also, the Upanishad literature is pretty vast. Now, it's possible to find something in one Upanishad expressed in one way, and something in another Upanishad expressed in a not a different way, which might also seem like contradicting what's said here. And so, one of the foundational texts of Vedanta is called the Brahma Sutra. And what the Brahma Sutra does, essentially, is to take up these different statements from different Upanishads, which might apparently seem to be mutually contradictory, and show that they are not contradictory. Show the contexts in which each of those statements came. And that was the genius of Vyasa, who wrote the Brahma Sutras, and then the commentaries of the great Acharyas afterwards. Now, all this background I mentioned to illustrate this point, that yes, the Upanishads do speak about the three states, the waking, dream, and deep sleep. And there are other texts which speak about, actually, if you want to make categories and subcategories, there are some books which say there are 24 states. If you want to make it complicated, welcome, we can do it. The simple way is, well, waking, dream, and deep sleep. Now, after these things are pointed in some of the Upanishads, here is this one Upanishad which says, Tatra Traya Swapnaha. There are three kinds of dreams. So, earlier Upanishad we said, well, there is waking, dream, and deep sleep. Seems like dream is one of the three states. But the other Upanishad says there are three kinds of dreams. Now, the commentators point out that unlike in the times in which we live, in which we pretty much can go buy any book that's available, or just go online and read whatever is possible for us to get hold of, irrespective of whether or not we are fit to understand what is there. That's a problem, really, because we often don't know how much of what we read is understood by us. We might know if it is not understood by us, if it doesn't make sense. But what's more dangerous is there is no way to know what is misunderstood by us. What we might think we have understood, but actually we have misunderstood. So that's the challenge of the time in which we live. Easy accessibility to information, but there is no controlling mechanism for us to take hold of what we are fit for at that stage. Because we evolve. What may not be intelligible to me now, maybe, if I evolve, may be intelligible to me after 5 years. But what I will be fit for after 5 years, if I read now, if I don't understand it, not so much a problem. If I misunderstand it, a big problem. Because wrong ideas, when they get into the head, getting them out is difficult. It's better that we didn't know anything. Then a clean slate is much better than a slate which has stuff written on it and which you cannot easily wipe off. Now, in olden days and the times in which the Vedas emerged, there were no books. And so the only way to get knowledge was to go to the teacher's place. And the teacher was an insightful person who knew at what stage you were. And then the teacher gave you, maybe to beginners, the teacher said, there are three states, waking, dream, and deep sleep. Then when the student evolved and was able to understand the finer nuances, to that same student, then teacher said, you know what? Instead of the three, waking, dream, and deep sleep, there are really three dreams. There are three kinds of dreams. A waking dream, a dream, and a deep sleep dream. Then what is the definition of dream? Why is it that we are able to dismiss dreams as if, we don't, when we wake up, no matter how terrible a dream might seem, when we wake up, we're able to just brush and say, oh, that is only a dream. Or how wonderful a dream may be. Maybe you win a lottery in your dream. When you wake up and you find it's a dream, that can be disappointing too. Well, it's not really, I haven't won anything. Now, I'm able to dismiss dream as dream because we say, well, it's not really real. So, I saw in my dream what didn't really exist, and that's why I call it a dream. Now, I'm not able to call this a dream because I still feel, well, this is real as opposed to the dream I saw at night. Now, when our mind becomes clearer, when we get a deeper insight, we recognize that all sensory perception, everything that is grasped through the senses, deceives us. And so, we are seeing the dream world through the dream senses, and we know it's not real. So just because our senses grasp something doesn't automatically mean it is real, otherwise we would never have been able to dismiss the dream world as unreal. Now, where we are not logical at all, is that exactly the same thing is happening here, but we say this is real, but that's not real. And it's from that point of view, therefore, that the Upanishad points out, if that is unreal, this is not any more real than that. Because here also we are depending on the senses. And so all of these three states, where we are not seeing reality as it is, that's a dream. So dream therefore is defined as perception of anything that is not real. So all of these three states, we are not seeing reality as it is, and therefore they are dreams. And that's why Swami Vivekananda said, we can see our entire lives as going from one dream to another. Death is another kind of dream. Or heaven is another kind of dream. Hell is another kind of dream. And these dreams, we might say, well, when will all this end? And the answer is, well, if you're moving in a circle never ends. And so, if I continue moving the way I'm moving, if I don't do anything about it, by default, it's not going to end. Because I'm just going to go round and round and round. Now, if I want to get out of the circle, I need to do something about it. And what I need to do is exactly what Krishna is describing here. So that's why this egotism is kind of a, it's almost like a, what's the word I'm saying? Think about it this way. What's you call that? The Ferris wheel? You go around that wheel? Or that's what we call it, Ferris wheel, right? Now, that wheel will not be able to go round if you kind of take out that hub in the middle. That kind of holds it together. All of the things that we experience, whether now or in dream or after death or heaven, hell, wherever, all of these things will not remain if this hub, which is the ego, which holds it all together, if the one who is experiencing it is not there, where will the experience go? It can't be just floating around without anybody to do it. So as long as I'm the one who is doing stuff, as long as I am the one who is experiencing stuff, the wheel will go on and on. We need to find a way to kind of pull it out. And that's what the Gita teaching will help us do. And we don't have to pull it out. Krishna is not saying, you got to remove it. Krishna is saying, well, if you enjoy going round and round, if you enjoy these different dreams, great, continue. If at any point you feel, now it's getting boring, or I don't like it, Krishna says, there is a way to get out. So you see how freedom, the idea of freedom is so inbuilt into the teaching. We are not being forced to believe in anything. We are not being forced to do anything. All that we are given is this sense of hope, that if at all you feel hopeless about the existential human situation, if you feel like you're kind of trapped into this, if you feel that there is no way out, don't think that way. There is a way out. That's the message of hope that Krishna brings through the teaching. Well, we have just dealt with Ahankara today, so there will be a lot more to discuss, which we will do next week. So if you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions.
Swamiji, the point you made about racial discrimination, I'm right now in graduate school, so there's a lot of emphasis on social justice, and we've been learning about the experiences of black communities, and also there's a lot of information in the news about police brutality and black transgendered people being harassed daily, sure. Murders. I'm finding it hard to understand how in that case the metaphor of like being in Fenway and being attached to the identity works, because for some people, when their external appearance leads to them being systematically and intentionally harassed and discriminated against, then they experience a form of discrimination that I find it hard to just see that as a way of, that if they saw themselves as Brahman, then would they still experience that? I don't know. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around this.
It's a good question. It's like this. How I see myself and how others see me are two different things. How I see myself is under my control. how others see me, it's not so much under my control. I mean, I can fight with them, I can argue with them, but they are seeing me according to their own mental makeup and their own karma that they're working out. How I'm seeing myself is according to my own mental makeup. Now, having said that, although they are two different things, how I see myself is often influenced by how others see me. That is really the problem. The two things are to recognize is how I see myself is completely under my control. The problem is how I see myself often gets colored by how others see me. So, for instance, and the common example would be, I might see myself as, I'm just an average person, let's say. Many of us don't know, very few of us think we are average. Most of us like to think we are above average. But even then, let's say even a kind of a humble person would say, I'm an average person. I'm not very extraordinary, but I'm not stupid either. Now, if someone were to, not just one person, say people repeatedly keep telling me, you are stupid, you are good for nothing. If I'm not strong enough, if I don't have sufficient self-knowledge, by self-knowledge I'm not meaning in a spiritual sense, just at the human level of who I am, my strengths, my weaknesses. Now, if I don't have sufficient self-knowledge, and if I tend to be influenced by what others think of me, that's going to affect me. That's going to create a doubt in my mind. I'm going to think like, oh, maybe everyone says I'm stupid, maybe I am stupid. Now, I need to then work on myself more because, well, what other options do I have? One option I have is I go on everyone who calls me stupid, I say, you are wrong, I'm not stupid. What do you think who you are? You think you call me stupid? You are stupid. Well, that's one option I can go about. And that's most of us kind of react to that. The other thing is someone calls me stupid and I look inside and say, well, am I stupid? And I find, well, I'm not stupid. So I don't become stupid just because someone calls me stupid, right? And so if looking upon me as a stupid person creates some waves in that person's mind, it is that person's problem. My problem is the reaction it creates in me. And I have the capacity to not being affected by it. Now, it's true. In many parts of the world, it's not just about what people feel. There are even social prejudices, biases. There are even legalities involved when people are discriminated, not just a kind of feeling in the mind of people, but certain of the rights and privileges may not be given to people because of certain identities that they carry. It's a difficult thing. What is possible, what Krishna would say is that no matter how the world looks at you, no matter what social, legal, cultural barriers are put in the minds of such oppressed minorities of various levels, that person has the capacity to rise above all those things and not be affected by it. It can be difficult. Well, nothing is easy, but it's possible to do it. In fact, in the Gita context, Gita is part of the book, a larger book called the Mahabharata. Now, there are actually many. It's really it's really a huge book. I think, in the most conservative estimate, it has 100,000 verses, plus and minus, given here and there. Now, among the many characters there, you see a vast spectrum of characters in that book. Now, for instance, one character that comes to mind is there is a character called Vidura. Now, in the society of those days, he comes from what would be an untouchable, a Shudra caste. Now, we can see that even though that was how the society saw that person, he was denied certain privileges. Well, for instance, he could not become the king. He could not do many things which anyone else in that situation would have been able to do. But he didn't see himself that way. Because his self-perception was different from others' perception of him, we find him to be like one of the most respected and a wise character. So, in brief, the answer to it is yes, it can be very difficult when the social environment around us does not support our identity. In fact, it tries to suppress our identity, tries to put obstacles in it. It can be very difficult. The good thing about this is that just as there are forces trying to suppress, there are also other forces trying to fight against the suppression. Not everyone may be temperamentally suited to take an activistic role, but there always will be in any society. That was the redeeming factor in human history, is that just as there were very ruthless, despotic people, there were also good people trying to fight it. And the ups and downs in history have always been whichever party seemed to be stronger at any given time. It's always, this ever the evolution has always been kind of a very up and down movement. There were times when good, positive, liberal ideas seemed to thrive, and then everyone seemed to be fine, and then suddenly some very limiting, narrow ideas come and they kind of push it down. That's human history. Now, as Vivekananda pointed out in the Karma Yoga lectures, the world as we see it probably is never going to change. And that might seem a very terrible thing to say. But if we look at history, we see that this has always been this up and down period. There will be good moments and bad moments. There will be social reforms taking place, and there will be again a degeneration. That's just how things have gone. The good point in this is that while the society as a whole may have its ups and downs, and which none of us is strong enough to change it, change the direction permanently, with little bit among our neighborhood, within our family, within this thing, depending on how powerful we are, we might be able to bring about a little bit of a reformation. But then again, there is no guarantee it's going to be there all, because some other nasty person will come ahead and then kind of push it down again. But if I try to do what is right, if I try to do what is good in my own life, and as much as it lies in my power among the people I work with, and if I do it in a selfless way, I will acquire that power which is very necessary in order for me to transcend my limitations. I can acquire then the power to not be affected by what other people think of me. What then becomes important is what I think of myself. And what the strength of Vedanta in some ways is that it gives us a very bright self-image. It tells us that, if you kind of repeat, in fact, to some extent, think about it this way, in the Western world, especially where Christianity flourished in the Middle Ages, the emphasis at different stages seemed to be, you are a sinner. Now, that did a lot of things. I mean, it was not just bad, but it really did bring that kind of a sense of guilt that I am bad. I have this kind of a weight of sin within me. Now, theologically, there are different ways of explaining it, but that's one way. Not everyone is a very theological expert to understand the finer nuances of what that meant. But just simply to a person being told you are a sinner, it's very different from someone being told you have all the power within you, you are infinite. So that's the strength of the Gita, is that it tells us in reality, it gives us a bright self-image. Now, at present, we ourselves might feel a bit uncomfortable, saying, I'm immortal, I'm divine, I'm perfect. I don't think so. But if we trust in the words of the text, I might say, that's not my experience now, but I believe in reality that's what it is. But it helps to think of me in a positive light. So even in books which are not necessarily dealing with spirituality, they emphasize the value of self-esteem. That if I don't esteem myself, if I don't have faith in myself, then nobody can help me. And so, yeah, all of these factors are at work in that thing.
Swamiji, can I ask one more question?
We're a little bit late, so maybe next time. Yeah. Anything else? Ashish? Yeah.
Swamiji, you said we create our own world. Do we have any control over what kind of world we create?
Oh yes, we do. The world, we see what we like to see. As long as, yeah, well, I think I'll stop there. We'll see what we like to see. In fact, one documentary came some time ago about this, about what we see. And there is a anecdotal story which said that what we see depends on our prior experience, our knowledge, and what our likes are. They said that when Columbus or Christopher Columbus or whoever these earlier discoverers, when they first came, it seems that the Native Americans who were here, the native tribes, they for a long time could not see those ships across the ocean. I mean, they had good eyesight, but although they of course knew about the smaller boats which they used for fishing and all of that, but these huge, gigantic ships on this thing, that concept did not exist in their mind, and that's why they didn't see it. So that's why, in real sense, we only see what we like to see. And there are many stories about this, but that's, I think, an important point. Yeah.
Maharaj, you explained about the dream stage. So we have to go beyond the dream stage, because when you are dreaming, ego is still there, because who is dreaming? Right?
Say that again?
You said about the dream stage. So dream stage means that ego is still there, because somebody is dreaming. If somebody is dreaming, means that ego is still there. I am dreaming.
No. When you are dreaming, you don't have the ego, I am dreaming.
But memory is the culprit that.
No, then when you wake up, the person who wakes up says, I had a dream. The person who is dreaming doesn't say, I am dreaming.
Yeah. So what my question is that is the mind who remember the dream and go back to sleep and then again wake up and say, I had a dream. So if mind is the culprit, so you said about dementia and Alzheimer, their brain function is not there, but they are not enlightened either. So how do I explain this mind is the culprit who is...
The mind is not the culprit. The mind is a seat of all emotions, feeling, mental impressions. The mind needs the body to interact with the world. You see, the mind by itself cannot do anything. Now, if my mind wants to pick this up, and if my hand is incapable of doing it, the mind can't do anything about it. So similarly, if the brain is affected, the brain is a physiological organ of the body. If the brain is affected, that doesn't necessarily mean the mind is affected. It's just that the instrumentality of the brain is not available to the mind, and so the mind is like, well, what can I do? So it's possible, again, how do we know what's going on in someone who is suffering from Alzheimer's? What is going on in the mind of that person, really only that person knows. All that we know is what we are seeing. And what we are seeing, we're not really seeing the mind. We are at the most seeing, if you run through the test, you are seeing all the brain imaging, and you are seeing the person. And so it's more a kind of a guesswork. It's like people who have pets. They say, this is what my dog is saying now. Only the dog knows what the dog is thinking. But we kind of think we know. It's a little bit like that. Yeah.
Swamiji, I feel we spend a lot of time in college learning who we are, learning our identity, to become comfortable in our skin. Does being comfortable in our own skin help us assess our true identity as a child of God?
Well, you then have to become comfortable in the skin of being a child of God. Yeah, I mean, if you're too comfortable being a human being and are so that becomes your definitive identity, then it might be difficult to let go of it. Provided we recognize that every one of our present identities are provisional, that they can change. In fact, we effortlessly change them. We just don't think about it as change. You see, when a person, for instance, when I'm with my parents, my identity as a son automatically comes up. When I'm with my children, my identity as a father automatically comes up. So we are really changing our identity, but it happens very, very naturally. So we don't think of it as change. And therefore, in the same way, can my identity as a child of God be as effortlessly moved? At least, for instance, to begin with, if I say that every time I go to a temple, every time I come to the Vedanta Society, and I think that's a great thing to do. Let's say if you say, every time I come for a satsang or a Gita class, during the time I'm here, I'm going to see myself as the Atman, or I'm going to see myself as the child of the Holy Mother. Now, maybe you are here for an hour or two. Now, if you can manage to hold on to that identity, even for a few minutes, there's already hope. If you can do it for a few minutes, maybe after a little bit of practice, you might be able to maintain it even after going out of the center. So always take, it's good to take baby steps. It's nice to think, oh, I'm always thinking of myself as a child of God. Well, that's great, but it's not going to happen overnight. So just as when you go to a workplace, your identity with whatever position you hold in the company you work for automatically comes up. So similarly, you can say, every time I'm in the Vedanta center, my identity as a spiritual seeker, my identity as a devotee, my identity as a child of God, I want that identity to be dominant at least as long as I'm in this space. That's the way I think to develop it. Yeah. Srikant.
So, Swamiji, I think from the so many lectures, always we tell that I have forgotten that I am soul, or we have forgotten. When we say I am forgotten, who is this I? Is it the mind we are talking about?
The Atman. The Atman who has become deluded. The deluded Atman.
But Atman cannot forget anything because Atman is God.
I know. That's why I said deluded Atman.
But who deleted this?
Who?
Who deleted the Atman?
Atman was never deluded.
Then
as if. But it's like the person has not changed. The person is there, just the person is forgotten. So you say, well, why did the person change? The person has not changed. Yeah, I mean, that's why it's called Maya. It's difficult to put it in rational terms because you're really asking how things have changed when things have not really changed. So your question really is not logical. All that you can say is how when things have not changed, they appear to have changed. And when things have not changed, they only appear to have changed. That can only happen through ignorance. And ignorance occurs because of forgetfulness. So it's all like this connected. Okay. Think about it. Yeah. Divesh? Yeah.
About how do we know that we've misunderstood? Would you be able to elaborate a bit more? Because it's relevant not only from a spiritual perspective, but even in our modern workplaces.
Sure.
Or we do analysis whole days and we are in meetings, we listen to people. How do we know that we've not misunderstood? So,
well, listen to people. People who know better than you. Yeah. That's it.
That's one of the challenges. How do I know I've not misunderstood what I'm listening?
That's why I said. That's why you have meetings. And meetings, the idea is, although if there are 10 people in a meeting, the possibility that all 10 people may be wrong also exists. But the general idea, I mean, that's the whole idea behind democracy. We know it fails, that the majority always makes a good choice. We know that it doesn't always work right. But that's the hope, that one person can be stupid, but 10 people would likely make some rational, good judgment. And that's why in spiritual life, that's why we need a teacher. That if I misunderstood something, and then the teacher will clarify it for me. So that's the way to do it. Okay, this is the last question. We're really beyond time. Yeah.
Swamiji, you said about faith, we should have faith in ourselves and self-knowledge. Do you think that too much of that can create, can cause egoism?
No. No, if we understand what having faith in oneself means, it may not cause. But if we, again, misunderstand it, then a very arrogant person can also say, I have very great faith in myself. So it just depends. I mean, you see, when you say I have faith in myself, we're just using words. But what we really mean to have faith in oneself would very much depend on what one's notion of the self is. Yep. So understanding what faith in oneself means is very much connected with one's idea of the self. That's important. Okay, so good. This was a good discussion. So when we meet next time, we will have to again continue with verse 53 because we have just dealt with ahankara. And there are at least 10 other things there. Years ago, in Bangalore, this has happened sometime I believe in the 1940s or 50s. We had a great scholarly Swamiji. His name was Swami Tyagananda. He's a profound scholar. So he started giving a class on the Gita, and the book that we are studying. And you are lucky that I don't know as much as he did, because the first verse of the Gita, it begins with Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre, and he began explaining the word dharma, and that took 6 months. The first word on the Gita. So that's why I said you are lucky. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So next Sunday, for the satsang, we celebrate the birthday of Shankaracharya, and the topic will be the story of Shankara. Next Wednesday, instead of the Gita class, we have a guest speaker, Swami Yuktatmananda, the head of our center in New York. He will be visiting us, and he will speak on, what's the topic? You have the May flyer. Can you get the May flyer from there? Okay, it doesn't matter. He's speaking on some very good topic. Because the May flyer isn't here. So, yeah, I'm not able to recollect. Although I send that flyer for printing, I'm not able to recollect this thing. Doesn't matter. It will be something related to the Gita study. So it's not be completely different. So all of you are welcome. That's a special lecture next Wednesday by Swami Yuktatmananda. And then a week after that, then we will resume the study of the Gita. And our Tuesday and Saturday meditation will also continue as usual. So we'll conclude with a prayer now on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.